Welcome to Momentum, a Race Forward podcast. Nearly 60 years after the passage of the Fair Housing Act, the United States is facing a deepening housing crisis, one defined by a shortage of more than 4.7 million homes, rising rents, high mortgage rates, evictions, and ongoing racial discrimination. But this moment is about more than a housing shortage. It's about a fundamental shift in how fair housing is being understood and enforced. Today, the federal government is not just stepping back from its responsibility to uphold fair housing, it's actively reshaping it. Under the banner of so-called colorblind policy, long-standing civil rights tools are being rolled back. Investigations into housing discrimination are being halted. And in a striking reversal, the Fair Housing Act itself is being used to target communities working to address racial inequities through so-called reverse racism claims. At a time when we need stronger protections, the very law designed to combat discrimination is being turned on its head. And yet, communities across the country are pushing back. Let's first hear from Nathan Cheung, Communications Manager for Housing Now, California.
For me and for our coalition, housing justice means being able to access stable, affordable, and healthy homes. Housing justice also feels free and light. It's about not having to worry about how you're going to pay for your rent. So for me, as a working class queer immigrant, I've experienced firsthand a lot of housing injustices, right? So when we think about the legacies of redlining or the legacies of segregation, these are all impacting and are key to why we're seeing such different outcomes for different people. And again, it's primarily impacting our Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. Our grassroots folks, students, people who actually have a lot of lived experiences, and in the housing justice work, being able to center those voices, build power so that we have a voice in the Capitol and Sacramento when we're talking to legislators, but also in the broader scheme of things, being able to take power back away from corporate landlords and the corporate landlord industry, which is for us one of the biggest challenges and threats that we're facing. They have so much lobbying power and money. We can build power through other ways, through coalition building, through organizing, through establishing relationships with legislators, through direct actions, through arts and culture.
What we're seeing at the local level tells a very different story from what's happening in Washington. Across the country, communities are refusing to let fair housing be weakened or redefined. Instead, they're advancing bold, practical solutions that get at the root causes of housing inequity. First, they're reimagining housing itself, not as a commodity, but as a public good. Cities and states are investing in community land trusts and social housing models that keep homes permanently affordable while putting land under community control. These approaches don't just prevent displacement, they begin to repair the damage caused by decades of redlining and segregation. Second, local governments are getting more intentional about where resources go. By pairing tools like the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit with targeted strategies and special purpose credit programs, they're directing investments into communities that have been historically excluded. And third, they're governing with courage. Even in the face of federal pushback, local leaders are strengthening protections, enforcing fair housing laws, and advancing policies that address segregation and displacement head on. From Boston to New Orleans to smaller towns across the country, communities are proving that progress is still possible and already underway. Andreanecia M, Executive Director of Housing Louisiana, shares her thoughts with us.
When we achieve housing justice, it will mean that people across this country, particularly in New Orleans, where I think we can achieve housing justice first, because that's where I live and that's the work that we're doing, it looks like people are able to choose where they want to be. And those choices are not constrained by money. They're not constrained by race. They're not constrained by gender. And if they're in the perfect housing opportunity, they are not going to lose it because of money, because of race, because of someone else's power. what we're talking about flies in the face of some of the most deeply held and things that prejudices that a lot of people don't even take moments to examine. Black, white, brown, doesn't matter. A lot of people hold these poisonous views about housing. A lot of people don't understand why they're so scared. One of the things that we know in New Orleans, Katrina has given us an interesting perspective. We're a little further along on this arc of injustice than the rest of the country. And the people of New Orleans don't have to be taught how close they are to being housing insecure, how close they are to being homeless. They know. So we're doing all of the above. We're working to change power by changing the narrative, by changing policy. And it's very much a feedback loop. So what we've done in New Orleans is some extraordinary work that we're incredibly proud of, where we've looked at the systems, what system needs to be in place, what levers need to be flipped, what investments need to be made available in order to guarantee housing for all, and to run out the numbers and to talk about if everyone in New Orleans actually could live in housing that they could afford, the people of New Orleans would have $500 million every year in their own pockets. So you talk about economic drivers. That's not a drain. That's an economic engine worthy of a community like New Orleans, worthy of any community.
So where do we go from here? Despite federal rollbacks, the path forward is clear, and it's already being built in cities and towns across the country. We have the tools to advance fair housing, investing in community-controlled housing, targeting resources to close racial gaps, strengthening renter protections, and reforming zoning to undo generations of exclusion. But this moment also demands something more. It demands that we reject the false promise of colorblindness and instead confront the real ongoing impacts of discrimination in housing. Because ignoring race doesn't eliminate inequity, it entrenches it. It also demands that we protect the original intent of the Fair Housing Act, not as a passive commitment, but as an active obligation to dismantle segregation and expand opportunity. And most importantly, it calls on all of us to support the communities already leading this work, organizers, public servants, and residents who are refusing to accept a two-tiered housing system. The fight for fair housing has always been about more than housing. It's about dignity, justice, and the ability for everyone to live in a safe, stable community. That fight is far from over. But across the country, people are showing us exactly how to win it. For more stories on how communities are working to ensure safe, affordable housing is available in their area, visit colorblind.com.